back to the Boropolis podcast. In this episode, well, Nathan, I mean, this is a real far cry from some of the earlier podcasts this season. We've got 2 wins to talk about. The positivity continues from the end of last week's podcast. The results are flying in. And realistically, I think this will just be another in a long chain of podcasts to come where we talk about Borough going unbeaten for the rest of the season.
I don't want to get too carried away, but 3 wins in a week is massively turned the mood of the fan base on Twitter and of me and yourself, Chris, as well. But yeah, 3 wins in a week, 2 to talk about in this podcast. Going through in the cup, back on track in the league. It's all looking very rosy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's certainly looking a lot rosier than what it was a few weeks ago. But before we sort of delve into this week's results and all the positivity, how's your week been? I know you had a game this morning. I didn't ask you your results because I wanted you to tell us all on the podcast, and you can even analyse your performance if you wish.
Yeah, playing Sunday League now. The Rudd's Arms FC, get that little shout out in there. Yeah, we were playing in the Challenge Cup this morning, 1-2-0 against Catterick Garrison. Big result for us through the next round of the Cup, much like Borough. And I filled in at centre-half, probably Cannavaro level in his Ballon d'Or season, but we won't delve too much into my performance on the podcast.
Yeah, do you know what? I think it's only right that, given the shout out, that this is going to become a running theme. If you are going to be a fixture in that back line, it's just going to have to be added to the sort of topics list for every podcast now, which I'm looking forward to be honest. I mean, just before we move on, Nathan, who's the next game coming up?
We have got Linthorpe Academicals next week.
And is that a big game or?
Well, we've played 3 games so far in the league. We've won all 3, and they've lost all 3. So the hope is that normal service resumes for the Rudds.
Well, fingers crossed. I'm sure the listeners and viewers will be keeping a keen eye on the results going forward. I think I've seen that you liking a few tweets of a Twitter account, so that is out there for people to go and have a look at if you wish to.
Yeah, go and follow it on Twitter. The Rudd's Arms FC, big club.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely sound it. And with you in that back line, I mean, the club's only going places is the word on the street anyway, Nathan. But yes, this isn't a Rudd's Arms podcast. It is a Middlesbrough one. So we'll talk about some of our results this week, Nathan. And we sort of agreed before we started recording that the best way of doing this, of course, as usual, would be to go chronologically, but also I'm probably going to take a bit of a backseat here and ask you more questions because you were in attendance for the Bradford game. You saw us progress into the next round. Of course, I've seen the goals back, but as of the way that the Carabao Cup operates these days, it is basically impossible to even find a stream online or be able to watch the game. For whatever reason that is, I'm not quite sure. But yeah, I can't lie and say that I watched the full game, but I've seen the highlights. So Nathan, obviously with the team selection, it was quite heavily rotated, but I think it was to be expected really against the opposition that we come up against. In terms of the team and those that probably haven't had as many minutes as they may have wished recently, who was your real sort of standouts?
Standouts on the night, I'd definitely say that the 2 in midfield were fantastic. Of course, Hayden Hackney, a mainstay in this Middlesbrough side, getting a run out in the cup. Brilliant, was very influential in the goal for Latte Lath, but also Dan Barlasser as well. A player that has found minutes hard to come by since Johnny Howson has come back into the side. After he was injured at the start of the season. But yeah, Dan Barlasser was fantastic on Tuesday night, just keeping things ticking over. Perhaps that was because he may have had a little bit more time on the ball in this game than he has had in championship games recently that he has played in. Of course, you've got to factor in the level of the opposition that we're playing against. Bradford are a League Two side, and of course, you expect Middlesbrough to dominate possession. Bradford sit and in a typical sort of cup tie fashion, a side that are lower down the football pyramid, looking to make a little bit of an upset of the game. You expect them to sit deep and try and hit the opposition on the break. So, yeah, you have to factor that in. But yeah, Hackney and Barlasser were my standouts on the night.
Yeah, and obviously nicely sort of transitioning into that opening goal of the game, Nathan. Hayden Hackney involved, and also quite a big moment for Emmanuel Latte-Lath, obviously. Now finding himself really as our second string striker, at the moment, at least anyway. And obviously, despite some sort of quite exciting signs in his early performances, he's found himself out of the team and not even getting on I think it's 3 games in a row now, it'll be, won't it, in the league. So yeah, a big moment for him, but also some brilliant play from the ever-improving Hayden Hackney.
Yeah, it was a really good move from Hackney, driving through the midfield. He had a Bradford player pretty much hanging off his back at one point, did really well to shrug him off. And yeah, in terms of his end product, it was there for all to see, with his passing behind for Latte-Lath. He composed himself, waited for Latte-Lath to make the running behind. And I think that a lot's made of the finish, and of course the goalkeeper probably should do better, with it sort of coming straight down his throat almost. But Latte-Lath does really well to get the shot off as early as he does. It probably catches the keeper a little bit by surprise, and hopefully that'll give him a bit of a confidence boost going forward.
Yeah, and just obviously on Latte-Lath, in terms of his general performance, I know you sort of highlighted Hackney and Barlasser, but was the signs there again? I mean, that we've seen in all of his performances, there's certainly that movement and pacing behind is something that I think Middlesbrough fans are sort of hanging on to at the moment, to hope that, you know, that more clinical edge comes to his game in the coming weeks. But were you impressed? Did he stand out, or was it a case of, you know, his performance was mainly, I guess, focused on that goal?
I think it was more of the same, really, from what we've seen of him in the league games, in terms of his pace and his movement in behind, a top notch. You can see that he's making runs all the time, and sometimes he just doesn't get found with passes, which is okay. But in terms of the chances that he had in the game, he had one big chance and he took it away. So it is an improvement in that aspect. Running the channels really well. There was one instance in the second half when he was sort of chasing a lost cause down the channel, and sort of just was 50-50 with the Bradford defender and got the better of him in terms of a little battle shoulder to shoulder. But yeah, as I say, in terms of chances, he had one chance and he took that one away. So that's always a bonus.
Yeah, and then obviously from one big moment for an individual to another one, really, and that come from Morgan Rogers, somewhat of a sort of carbon copy of his goal against Bolton earlier on in the competition, assisted by Riley McGree again. But in terms of similarly to what I was saying about Latte-Lath, what was Rogers' performance like in general? And then obviously, as I'm sure people have seen, he took his goal fairly confidently, but his general performance, did he impress, or did the occasion sort of pass him by a little bit apart from that goal?
I don't think the occasion passed him by necessarily, but I think that when your confidence isn't there, you can sort of tell in the performance. And at times his first touch was a little bit off, which at the start of the season, what we saw from Rodgers was, I think his touch was sort of there at times. You could see him sort of trying to shift the angle and trying to sort of get himself turned and driving at players, but it wasn't necessarily there on Tuesday night. But yeah, as you mentioned, he gets that chance from McGree and directs it on target. Once again, the keeper you're probably looking at him thinking you probably should be saving that. It comes straight at you. But it goes through his legs, up onto the crossbar and in the back of the net. And yeah, I think at the start of the game, I didn't feel like there was going to be a cup upset. When we scored our first goal, settled any sort of nerves in the away end. And then when we got the second, it was all but tie done, which was relatively early in the second half as well. So it was, a relatively comfortable evening's work for Borough. And in terms of the sort of final 10 minutes of the game, we let Bradford grow into it a little bit in the final 10 minutes, possibly being the architects of our own downfall a little bit, trying to be too confident, playing out from the back and giving them half chances, I suppose. But Borough's quality shone through in the end. It was a relatively comfortable evening for Borough. Bradford, I know they're a League Two side, but I was expecting a little bit more from them in terms of their attacking intent in the game. But through to the next round of the Cup, and the draw came out, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And I mean, we are heading to St James's Park, and I think before the balls had started being, shown on telly, you were very, very concerned that the number 6 ball that we were was going to be drawn against a different team, St James's Park, obviously Newcastle. You were quite terrified, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. I think it's possibly quite similar to you, Chris. About 18 months ago, I didn't really know any Newcastle fans, but all of a sudden they've all come out of the woodwork because they've got a granddad who's from Newcastle, or definitely. But fair play to them beating Man City on Wednesday night. It did really worry me that we'd be going there, but it turns out we're going to a different St James's Park, and they're going to Old Trafford. So come on, Man United.
Yeah, I was just about to say the same thing. But as we've sort of alluded to, Exeter in the next round, obviously away from home. I mean, apart from the obvious sort of narrative around being drawn against lower league opposition again, and I guess some of the excitement that's caused, because, I don't think it would be overstepping the mark to say it does look like quite a good opportunity to potentially progress. And then, all of a sudden, after a few wins against lower league opposition, you're sort of looking at this cup run and thinking, well, if we could maybe pick up a favourable draw again, I think people have got reason to get a little bit giddy and excited, to be honest. And look, the tables are already starting to turn in regards to my sort of position as a Fairweather Cup fan. If we do sort of succeed in the next round and go past Exeter, then, I'll be looking at hotels for Wembley. So after all of the previous podcasts of me saying that I didn't really care about the cup, I mean, that's been completely spun on its head now. And what I will say, actually, Nathan, whilst we were sort of on the topic, do you know, I've always understood the sort of line about how, winning games in the cup, winning breeds more winning. And I've always, believed it. But I think with the weekend's result, it has sort of, I've taken a step back and looked at the cup results and thought, actually, this season, it probably, almost assessing the way that I've looked at the cups in previous years, and probably because we've been so poor at the start this season, it's actually been really important in the way that our season's gone at the moment. And in fairness, I'll happily hold my hands up and say that I completely underestimated that. But those wins, when you look at it now, and obviously the change in mood, they really have been crucial, because without them, it could have been so much worse in terms of the general mood around the club.
Yeah, it definitely could have been. You look back to that Bolton game in particular, where we were definitely stuck in a rut in terms of the Championship. And of course, going to Bolton, you think, well, it's sort of a free hit in the way that it's not a league game, and hopefully you can have a few players go out there and express themselves. And look, Bolton are a League One side, lower league to ourselves, but by no means are they like a bottom half League One side. They're pushing to be promoted into the Championship, and getting a result against them, albeit in added time as well, which is a bonus. You score late winners and they boost confidence as well, with the whole sort of mantra of never giving up and things like that. And then of course you get a draw against Bradford, and after last Saturday against Southampton, getting your first league win, you want to follow it up in your next game with another positive result. And I suppose with it being against League Two opposition, the lowest side that we've played in the Cup so far in this run, it was always sort of hope that we would go there and do the business. And yeah, we certainly did do that on Tuesday night. And now we're in the last 16. That feels a bit weird to say because we've only been through 3 rounds. But yeah, it's sort of just a nice little thing to have going on in the background of now some positive results going on in the league, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think in terms of even, the whole idea of winning breeds more winning, even in terms of some of the momentum that players have managed to build up through that competition. And obviously we'll speak about them at greater length, I'm sure, when we really go into the details of the Watford game. But you look at someone like Riley McGree, and what an opportunity the competition sort of given him to really basically give Michael Carrick no other reason than to put him in the starting 11 in the league games, because I don't want to get drawn back into the whole Riley McGree topic, and I think he's firmly put to bed any doubters in regards to him being one of the first names on the team sheet. But just little sort of sliding doors moments like that, and his goals in the cup and his contributions to our run at the moment, it's just it is a sort of, as you say, a nice distraction, and it's given us some momentum. And I think, look, it's taken me 3 podcasts now to hold my hands up and say that I was probably a little bit wrong about the lack of importance in the cup. But look, I'm always open to sort of admitting that I was wrong. And I think, yeah, I am still a Fairweather Cup fan, but I'm absolutely crossing everything that we can proceed into the next round and hopefully continue in the competition, Nathan.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you go into that last 8, then, well, you're looking at, if you get a favourable draw, as you mentioned, Chris, then you're hoping for an even nicer one. Although, of course, the pool of teams gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and the likelihood is you're gonna face a big team somewhere in the final 8 or the final 4, and it's always going to be difficult when you go to those latter rounds, because the big clubs start taking competition a little bit more seriously. You have the sort of Newcastle's like last year that sort of prioritised the cup at times last year in the hope of getting that trophy in the cabinet. And then you have the typical big clubs, your Man Uniteds, your Liverpools that are still there, that, yeah, they'll be eyeing up silverware to get it's the first trophy in the season, isn't it? So get that first trophy in the cabinet, and hopefully you kick on in the FA Cup or elsewhere if you're in European competition. But yeah, it would be nice to continue to progress throughout the cup. It'll be a difficult test, Exeter, despite everyone getting a little bit carried away that they are lower league opposition. They have just knocked out a Premier League side at St James's Park. And yeah, it'll be a difficult test. But yeah, I think we need to eradicate the cup from our mind for now, because it's nearly a month away, I think, actually. Oh, it is, yeah, a month away, that game against Exeter. And we had to shift our focus back to the league this weekend with a game away at a historically poor ground for Middlesbrough travelling to, which of course is Vicarage Road, the home of Watford. So, yeah, a difficult test once again. A game that we wanted to continue our league form in, a game that I looked at and thought, well, we usually struggle there, but they haven't got off to the best start in terms of their league campaign as well. And I felt confident that we could go there and get a positive result in terms of maybe a draw. What about yourself, Chris? Were you confident going into this one?
Yeah, I was. I mean, we sort of briefly discussed it in the last podcast, but I was very much skeptical about sort of that one win against Southampton being really sort of the turning point of our season, and it's still not that at the moment. You know, we're still very early days in terms of that recent little bit of positivity that we've had. But yeah, like you, I always look back on the history of certain grounds, and although it might not have any bearing on the actual result because teams change, it always seems to affect my predictions in terms of, well, we never win there, so we're not going to win today. And yeah, that was overbearing, that feeling of sort of impending doom going to Vicarage Road. I mean, even last season, that last moment winner from Watford, which I seem to remember that you were in attendance for, which, I mean, I shouldn't laugh, but I just remember some of the voice notes and messages I was receiving on your journey back from Watford last season, and how distraught you were. So yeah, I mean, it was a little bit funny, but yeah, Nathan, we won't go and take you back to that moment. But yeah, as I say, really pleasantly surprised. And I think in terms of the actual performance, not just from Middlesbrough, but both teams, just really taken back as to how open the whole game was. You know, Valerian Ismail, yes, his managerial sort of successes come with quite fairly dramatic tactics. I think back to that Barnsley team he had his success with, and it was just bizarre to watch at times, in terms of how many players they committed forward and basically how open they seemed to be. But yeah, that sort of theme, I guess, continued in yesterday's game. And apart from, you know, the shock of Darragh Lenihan not being in the team to start off with, I think the major shock yesterday was basically, as I've said, just how open the actual game was.
Yeah, of course, as you mentioned, Lenihan missed out. Thankfully, just through illness, no serious injury. As you messaged me before we knew that yesterday in a panic that Darragh Lenihan may have faced a spell on the sidelines. But yeah, thankfully that's not going to be the case, hopefully. But yeah, in terms of the game, it has to be very open if Middlesbrough are going to be 2-0 up within the first quarter of an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was bizarre, really, to see Middlesbrough go 2-0 up as early as we did. It doesn't ever seem to really happen that way. We usually, especially in the last year since Michael Carrick has arrived as manager of Middlesbrough, we don't usually go ahead too early in games. We usually build our way into games. And I suppose last year we would score usually before half time, but never as early as 5 minutes on the clock, which of course was the case with Riley McGree's goal yesterday. In terms of the goal, I think that we have to touch on Johnny Howson's touch. It's been bandied around as if he's meant to sort of flick it through the Watford player's legs and round him and then just go on his merry way. But Yeah, I think we're a bit fortunate there in terms of his pass. I think he's actually tried to play it with his left foot. It's come off his right foot, and it's, well, luckily for Middlesbrough, it's fallen for him perfectly on the other side of the Watford midfielder, and he's on his way. He lays it through to Riley McGree, who's picked up a really good pocket in between the right centre half and the right wing back, and yeah, strided into the box, one touch, and neatly just passes it into the corner, in the near post. And yeah, I think, as you said a minute ago, Chris, I think one of the words that you said were pleasantly surprised. And to see Borough go 1-0 up after 5 minutes, it was a bit of a shock to my system, really.
Yeah, yeah, no, the same for me. And I think just touching on the house and showboat. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if he's meant to do that, and if he has, I'm gonna believe he has, just because I love Johnny Howson. But yeah, when I at first glance, I did sort of for a split second say, "Oh, for God's sake, he's given the ball away. He's trying to play it off with his left foot," and then actually Watford's midfield was just that open that he ran round the player closest to him with a lot of ease into a whole massive gaping hole, and yet slipped through Riley McGree. And again, even the sort of shock factor was there from the finish, and I don't mean that in terms of Riley McGree tucking his chance away. Just it almost seemed like Daniel Bachman was stood there as one of those dummies that you sort of just press into the grass in a training drill. He just sort of stood there and watched it go by him. I know not a lot of Watford fans are too keen on Daniel Bachman, but I can kind of see why, actually, after seeing some of his decision making yesterday. And actually, I mean, the second goal is a great move, but again, I was sort of just sat watching the game thinking, who am I watching here? Because look, we've played some great stuff under Michael Carrick, but I almost couldn't believe that the team I was seeing when we go 2-0 up was the same team that I'd seen in the however many games previously in the build up to this. It was just wonderful to watch, but also a complete surprise to my eyes, really.
Yeah, and I think the second goal in particular is, as you mentioned, a good move by us in terms of Dieng playing the ball out straight into midfield, into Riley McGree, who knocks it on one touch to Crooks. Crooks strides forward, and for some reason, nobody's picking up McGree on the edge of the box. He's just ghosted there, and he puts his finish in the far corner and Borough 2-0 up. But where are Watford in this? Like,
Again, it doesn't feel like this is a Borough training drill at this stage, because there was just sort of complete static movement from Watford in regards to their attempt. And I'm going to do that. And for audio listeners, I've basically just sort of held up quotes in terms of that was meant to be defending. I'm not sure what they were playing at, but yeah, it did look far too easy for Middlesbrough, didn't it?
Yeah, both goals in the first 10 minutes. Really, really poor from a Watford perspective. But seeing as though I'm a Middlesbrough fan, this is a Middlesbrough podcast, we're going to take it as Borough just being really good and playing out really well. And yeah, look, the goal is really good, the second one, in terms of our own or overall play, as I touched on there. McGree's awareness to be able to just knock the ball on one touch to Crooks, really good. Crooks steps forward and is composed with his decision making, lays it off to McGree. And as you mentioned with Dan Bachman earlier on, I think I'm not sure what he's anticipating really, but he leaves half of his goal open for McGree to just cushion the ball into the corner. But 2-0 up after 12 minutes, it was all rosy in Teesside, and it was almost too good to be true, I think.
Yeah.
And I was on the phone to my granddad, actually. He's away in Portugal currently. Rang him, said, what's going on here? Borough 2-0 up after like 15 minutes. I said, what's going on? And as I was on the phone, lo and behold, you have the deficit halved.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, look, it's one of those where Dale Fry will never ever want to see this back. It is basically a long. I was going to use the word pass there, but it's not even much of a pass, really. It's more of a hoof up
Hoof,
the field.
hoof.
And Dale Fry just doesn't anticipate the ball, really. He sort of almost tries to karate kick the ball in midair. He sort of, I mean, for any wrestling fans that may be listening or watching, do you know Shawn Michaels' finisher move, Sweet Chin Music? Yeah.
Yeah.
So get that reference, you'll understand what I mean by that. He's pretty much tried to hit that on the ball as it's going past him and completely missed the ball, which then leads to Bio just basically running in behind and slotting it past the Yang. And we've, I mean, it's an individual error. And look, Dale Fry doesn't tend to make an awful amount of individual errors. He's normally Mr. Reliable in most cases. But in terms of this goal, it's just really bad, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think in this instance, I think he gets sort of caught in two minds between what he actually wants to do. I think he's sort of concentrating on Bio more than where the ball's going.
Yeah,
In sort of the full passage of play, really, as the ball's obviously flying forward from Porteous's foot. Dale Fry's sort of on the back foot already, trying to chase Bio in behind. I think he is anticipating a long diag that's going over the top, which doesn't really come to fruition with the ball bouncing past him up the inside. And in fairness to Bio, he gets him behind really well, and he takes that one relatively easily. And yeah, it was possibly a little bit of a wake up call in the game where look, this game's not done. And yeah, in terms of where the game went from there, they had another chance with Bio once again, rounding Dieng. And I think really he should be putting the chance away. Of course, the angle's tight. You have Borough defenders covering the goal, but you've got to hit the target there. Really, he's rounded Dieng and he's hit the side net in. Yeah, poor from a Watford perspective, but yeah, a little bit of a let off there for Borough.
yeah, and obviously at that stage of the game, I think if Watford's first hadn't really woken Borough up from being two ahead, that chance certainly did. In fairness, and at that stage, although we didn't sort of go back to absolutely running riot, we gained a little bit more control in terms of just a little spell in the game where we had a little bit more possession. We weren't being sort of as aggressive and really leaving ourselves at risk. And in that period, also, unfortunately, Lewis O'Brien goes off, which, given our start and given his role in the team in the previous couple of games and even during the Watford game, it's a crushing blow, isn't it? Because we've had our troubles in regards to the injury to Bangura. We've had our troubles in regards to Hayden Coulson and Engel, both showing at this stage they are not cut out to be a starting left back in the Championship. And with Lewis O'Brien, although it's sort of universally agreed amongst Borough fans that, it's not the position where we're going to see the best of Lewis O'Brien, he is the best option right there at the moment. And actually, I think what perhaps has helped us in the last few games is the fact that with Rav Vandenberg going into that right back slot, it almost enables us to sort of mirror the type of style that we saw last season from Borough, with the only tweak to it probably being that, Rav Vandenberg inverts and we get that back three that we saw last season. But Lewis O'Brien, instead of sort of, being in the position of a winger, he almost becomes an extra body in the midfield, and he doesn't get to the byline and deliver crosses like Ryan Giles did. But he gives Borough that added control in sort of those parts of the pitch on the left, and it also helps Riley McGree be able to sort of go unnoticed because he's able to do what he does best and find those little pockets and basically evade defenders whose, you know, I guess their mind's taken up by that added body in Lewis O'Brien being higher up the pitch. But yeah, as I say, a real crushing blow because of that, but also because of the fact that at that stage in the game, we just needed to, you know, ride it out a little bit and make sure that we didn't quickly basically give up our 2-goal lead, having already had that deficit halved, as you say. But yeah, obviously following the game and following the result, Michael Carrick has basically said that it's not looking too good. They have really feared the worst in terms of what injury that could be. We still don't have a definite timeline or a definite diagnosis as to what injury it is. But after the positivity of the result, it did take a shine off it a little bit because, you know, Lewis O'Brien was starting to show what a big piece of Middlesbrough's team he could be this season.
Yeah, it's a massive shame, isn't it, really, in terms of the summer signings that we've made. He was probably the standout in terms of what he could bring to the side with the here and now, I suppose, because he's done it in the division before. And look, we probably haven't even seen the best of him either because he's been sort of shoehorned in at left back because of mishaps in recruitment and injuries in that position. But look, we have to sort of just take that one on the chin, I suppose, and move on. I think I did see Carrick's interview prior to the Watford game that said Force and Bangura will be back before the international break, which, look, that's a massive bonus, of course. Having Bangura there to come back in. Hopefully he can come straight in and be right up to speed, being able to give us 70, 80 minutes in the game on Tuesday night, because we are very shy in that position now. Of course, we do have Engel there, but from what we saw of him a little over a week ago, it's not looking too promising in terms of the quality level there. So yeah, a massive shame for Borough, for Lewis O'Brien as well. Let's hope that it isn't as serious as first anticipated, and it's not a full season on the sidelines, as I think when you have sort of quotes like Carrick gave there, you do fear the worst that could mean a season out. And yeah, it's a massive shame, but yeah, unfortunate.
Yeah, and I think just before we sort of move on to the second half, just in regards to you mentioning there that at the moment, you know, Lucas Engel, from what we've seen, isn't up to scratch. But in terms of Michael Carrick's opinion of that situation and that scenario at the moment as well, I think it spoke volumes that he opted to move Ralph van den Berg to left back and bring on Tommy Smith, as opposed to putting a natural left back in that position. And look, I don't want to open the whole recruitment dialogue again, but I mean, it's not ideal that at this stage, look, it's still very early days, but Michael Carrick is basically looking at that situation and thinking he'd rather put someone who, yes, has played a couple of games as a fullback, but on his favoured side, is now, you know, the next best option, I guess. And obviously, we hope that Bangura's back soon, but it'll be interesting to see what Michael Carrick does, because I think he'll probably opt to use Ralph van den Berg there again on Tuesday if that injury situation sort of hasn't cleared up by then. So yeah, a disappointment with that injury. But Nathan, going into the second half, yet again, that old chestnut that we seem to go back to every single podcast, we have half time, and only a short period after that, we concede.
Yeah, we do. And it was coming as well in terms of minutes before Bayo had that other chance where he's in between the Borough back line, gets higher than everyone else, heads it into the ground, and Dieng makes a good save, tips it around the post. But in terms of the goal, Borough have tried to clear the set piece, headed it away, and Wesley Hoot comes flying in at the back post, a centre half, and on the half volley with his left foot. It's sort of like one of those finishes that sort of just stops in time a little bit, because the ball looks like it's arrowing towards the top corner with as little pace as possible. And yeah, it eventually loops into that top corner. You go from 2-0 up to 2-2, and I was certainly fearing the worst at that time. Straight after half-time, once again, as you mentioned, Chris, it's a running theme, and I think I'm just wasting my breath talking about it constantly, because I feel like
there's something from like a few weeks ago where we talk about it, or maybe it's the Huddersfield game last season where we talk about it, or the Huddersfield game this season where we talked about it. But yeah, it's a running theme, isn't it? And I mean, when you look at the goal, in fairness, it's not probably that there's not much where you can look at it and sort of blame Borough in this instance. It's not horrendous defending. I think 9 times out of 10, if the Watford defender in question, that scenario occurs and it bounces to him as he comes steaming in, he's probably putting it out of the stadium 9 times out of 10. So obviously with the look of this season, of course it was going to loop into the top corner. And yeah, again, I mean, no questions to be asked of Seny Dieng. But yeah, that moment in the game really sunk everyone firmly back down to earth. And you sort of thought, well, all of that huge level of positivity from the Southampton game and the start to the Watford game, it quickly sort of evaporated, really. But actually, we find it within ourselves again. And as I spoke about earlier, from Watford's sort of over willingness to just commit bodies forward, we find ourselves in a situation again where, listen, it's a fantastic pass from the big tree, but Josh Coburn, a clever bit of movement, finds himself one-on-one with Daniel Bachmann. And I mean, Nathan, Daniel Bachmann, we've spoken about him already in this podcast. It is not great positioning, but Josh Coburn does what he has to do and gets the ball around him. It hits the back of the net, and Middlesbrough find themselves 3-2 up.
Yeah, I think this one, in terms of us playing through the midfield, it comes a bit fortuitously in terms of Hayden Hackney has the ball in the middle of the pitch, tries to play it into Johnny Howson. It's overcooked. No Watford player is aware to the ball going astray, and it goes straight through to Matt Crooks, who's in a load of space in that right half space. From then on, it's really good play. Crooks drives forward, lays it in behind, perfectly weighted for the Teesside. Haaland running in behind, shrugs off Hoot, and yeah, I don't want to get too carried away with the Watford goalkeeper, but Coburn slides this one down his near side into the back of the net. Borough 3-2 up, and yeah, back into the lead. It's this one gives me a little bit of satisfaction in the fact that you've had a little bit of hardship in the game where you were 2-0 up. You've got yourself in a really good position, and when it all looks like it's going to go wrong once again, when it goes 2-2, you have the ability to just sort of relax, reset, get yourselves back into the game in terms of the swing of things and playing your way, and you bounce back. And Borough do exactly that. It's a good finish from Coburn, getting in behind, being stronger than his centre half, and yeah, good finish, slides it in that near post, and yeah, Borough 3-2 up. My hope was that we could just hold on, which of course we did, but it didn't come without a few shaky moments.
Yeah, there was certainly a few scares, wasn't there, Nathan? And look, we're not moving on from the Watford topic, but I think, when we come to the end of sort of going over a game, we usually talk about individuals. And I think one individual that we might as well start talking about now is Seny Dieng, because yes, there's one moment in the dying embers of the game where Matthias Martins basically beats Dieng and beats everyone. And for the life of me, I just thought it was about a nestle into the back of the net and I was going to sink into the sofa and cry myself to sleep last night. But actually it clips the bar. And yeah, there's nothing Seny Dieng could have done about that strike from Martins. But yeah, referring to Dieng's numerous saves in the final sort of section of the game, and just his general sort of start to life at Middlesbrough. It's something that we have briefly spoken about, but I think yesterday, given the positivity, given the result, and the fact that we've conceded 2 goals, and yet you look at Dieng yesterday and think, I think Neil Maddison gave him man of the match on BBC Tees. And it's not often when a goalkeeper concedes 2 that you could do that. But, it's such a real highlight of the season so far in terms of his start to the season, because you look back at last season and you look at the vital part that Zach Steffen played for Middlesbrough in terms of his individual performance, but also what he offered to the team as a whole. And it's a specialist position now, isn't it? You couldn't have just gone and for the way that Michael Carrick wants to play, you couldn't have just gone out and picked any goalkeeper to play that role. It had to be a certain individual that was willing to distribute the ball, willing to basically be able to put his foot on the ball and just wait and invite pressure, and then be good enough to also make the right decision and play a pass or distribute the ball wherever, if it's clipped into midfield or if it's passed to the fullback. And Seny Dieng, from the evidence that I've seen so far, I don't think it would be ridiculous for me to say that in terms of the level he's performing at, I think he could be an upgrade on Zach Steffen. And that is huge praise in itself. And look, and I know Zach Steffen, that's not a slight on Zach Steffen at all, because he was superb, such a strong figure towards the back end of last season. But even then, Zach Steffen had some moments where fans sort of were head in hands. And I'm sure Seny Dieng will have them throughout the season. But from what I've seen so far, I've been so impressed with some of the saves he makes. I know that's his job. He's a goalkeeper. He should be, saving these chances and preventing Middlesbrough from conceding more and more goals. But his role in the team, for me, just can't go unnoticed. And I've been so impressed. And he made some vital saves yesterday. But even you see with the second goal, the ability just to clip it into midfield, inch perfect pass into McGree, and it starts our attack off. I really, in a summer where there's been so much criticism sort of thrown at the recruitment team, they've certainly got this one right at the moment, because he's been one of the best additions we've made.
Yeah, he has been. I think he's probably been like for like almost in terms of getting a permanent replacement for Zach Steffen. I think even if you look at the build in terms of them as a goalkeeper, very similar. In terms of playing out from the back and clipping balls forward, I think that Steffen probably still just edges it but Dieng, I think yesterday was probably the first time, especially in that second goal, where the move starts from him really playing that ball into midfield for McGree. And yeah, I think that, as you mentioned, a lot of people have had a lot to say about the recruitment team based on our start to the season, ourselves included. But
Yeah.
I think the both been very impressed really with Deezen against Millwall, making that 1v1 save against Nisbet really stood out. And there's been a lot of sort of talk on social media from other fans and championship podcasts that are quick to sort of throw mud at Seny Dieng because Middlesbrough have had a poor start to the season. He's conceded a lot of goals. But anyone that's watched us is probably in agreement that a lot of the goals, he can't really do anything about them in terms of he's conceded worldie after worldie.
Yeah.
And the other goals that he's conceded really have been defensive errors. And look, if you can sort of point and make an agenda about anything if you have a daft stat to back it up, but on the eye test, Seny Dieng's been a really good signing for Middlesbrough so far.
Yeah, and obviously I referred to it a little bit earlier, but there's, certain individuals for me that I just felt, really deserved a bit of loving after the results. And obviously Seny Dieng being one of them, but also the big tree, Matt Crooks. I mean, he's become a player this season. And I think throughout his time at Middlesbrough, probably with the exception of his first season, under obviously Warnock to begin with, and then Chris Wilder, he's always sort of divided opinion. A lot of people are quick to sort of, basically make assumptions that because he's tall and he's a physical presence, that's all he's good for, and basically neglect the sort of technical ability that he does possess and that killer pass that he can play. And what I will say is I still don't think that number 10 role is probably his best position in terms of him as a player. But certainly at the moment, at least, he's making that position his own because he's contributing, whether that be through in the Southampton game, probably not the most standout performance in regards to getting a goal or an assist, but certainly his work rate, the ability that he has to win the ball back, I think massively goes under the radar. And I think yesterday, whether it was a tactical tweak or whether he took it upon himself, I'm not sure, but he seemed to be in that sort of right half space that you spoke about a little bit earlier on in the podcast, where he had so much success with Isaiah Jones and Anthony Dijksteel, in particular, in Chris Wilder's system. And I think he is most effective when he finds himself in that area of the pitch. And we saw it yesterday twice, where for the second goal, obviously, he slides the ball across to Riley McGree, who scores. And then yesterday, I mean, the eye of the needle stuff in terms of the pass for Josh Coburn, it's a wonderful pass. And yeah, I just felt that he deserves some real praise because for me, I've always been a huge fan of him. I know that at times it doesn't quite look, I think sort of similarly to Marcus Forss last season when he was first out on that right, we sort of said in the least disrespectful way possible, he looks a little bit uncomfortable playing that role. But I think as the games go on, he's slowly growing into it. And yeah, I've never doubted that Matt Crooks isn't a good footballer in the Championship. And I think there's still lots and lots of teams in the Championship that would absolutely snap our hands off to have Matt Crooks from our squad. And yeah, I'm just happy for him that, we know how much of a good character he is for the dressing room. We know the type of man that he is. But now it's not just a case of, oh, well, the big tree's good around the dressing room and he's good to high on up front. We're seeing that he's starting to impact the games and be someone that Michael Carrick can really rely on.
Yeah, I think one thing that is sort of always picked up on about Matt Crooks is he's sort of a uncomfortable footballer to watch in terms of you look at his frame, and of course we're talking about the technical side of the game, but when he gets the ball in tight spaces, you think he's I don't know, you don't necessarily look at him and think, oh, you'll be able to wangle yourself out of this situation like possibly a Riley McGree could do because of his smaller frame, he's more agile. But look, in terms of Matt Crooks, he's effective, and he always has that knack of setting goals up, scoring goals himself. He contributes at that top end of the pitch, and that is why he's playing at the level that he's playing at, because, as I mentioned, he looks uncomfortable at times in midfield, possibly looks a little bit out of place at times as well, in there with your Johnny Howsons and Hayden Hackneys that look like they can get about the pitch. Crooksy possibly can't do that really for a full 90 minutes. He'll give you his all last week, as I told you. He'll give you his all for 60, 70 minutes, and then he gasses. That's his tank. But yesterday, in terms of his end product, he came to the fore once again, set 2 goals up perfectly. But even when the team came out yesterday at 2:00, you read the comments to get the reaction, and there's a lot of people in the comments that still want to slander Matt Crooks being on the team sheet. There's certainly a reason behind that, and his performance yesterday proved just that in terms of going out there, getting himself 2 assists, and we're probably likely to see Matt Crooks in that number 10 position for a long time into the future, because, as mentioned by yourself, Chris, Michael Carrick likes to experiment with players and try and find players that do look quite uncomfortable at times, unorthodox players, but they just need to be effective, like Marcus Forss on that right-hand side. You can tell he's the most unnatural right winger ever, but when he's out there, he can certainly get at a man, or he can come inside and get shots off. With Matt Crooks in that 10, you have a player that has a knack of breaking from midfield, arriving late and scoring goals, and that's what we need. We need goals at the top of the pitch to substitute what we no longer have in terms of a Chuba Akpom, Cameron Archer, etc., etc. So yeah, you have a player there that's very effective at the top end of the pitch, and yeah, the likelihood is that we're likely to see him retain that place for a long time into the future, I think.
Yeah, and finally, in regards to yesterday and individuals, I think we've got to talk and continue the theme of the top of that pitch, and obviously Josh Coburn getting his goal yesterday. We spoke about him last week, and I think I basically suggested the idea of potentially pairing him with Lai Lath. And look, I don't think that's going to happen. I think if that was going to happen, if Michael Carrick was going to change shape or go with something different, we'd have definitely seen it by now. So I think we can probably write the idea of that off. But in regards to what Josh Coburn has brought to this Middlesbrough team in his last 3 league starts, it's a real vocal point. And again, I'll reiterate what you said last week. For a footballer of his age, and yes, of course, his stature helps. He's a really big lad for his age. But he plays, for me, so beyond his years, it's ridiculous. I mean, I saw some utterly ridiculous comments yesterday about how, almost off the pace Josh Coburn looked, and that, it wasn't, sort of basically trying to take away all the positives of what Josh Coburn brought to the Middlesbrough side yesterday, because he's tall and he lays passes off and he's not sort of getting in behind and being Cameron Archer. Well, there's different types of strikers in football. And for me, Josh Coburn I come away from that game yesterday just again thinking Middlesbrough over the years haven't been too fortunate in terms of their academy graduates in the forward areas of the pitch, especially strikers. But I think we've got every reason to be excited about Josh Coburn for years to come, because I just look at him now and I think if that's him at whatever age he is, I think he's 19.
20.
Yeah, 20. Then what's to come from him? Because his hold-up play yesterday, even, yes, okay, Bachmann doesn't cover himself in glory, but the finish for his goal and just his general ability to make experienced, strong Championship centre-halves look like kids whilst they're trying to drag him down. The amount of times yesterday where Porteous is all over Coburn, dragging at his shirt, doing everything he possibly can, and he just can't. He gets his shoulders out, he gets his arms out, and he makes the ball stick. And at the moment, especially this season when we've struggled so much to defend, just having someone that can make the ball stick in the attacking areas of the pitch, it really can't be underestimated how important that is.
No, it certainly can't in terms of his part to play in Middlesbrough's build-up. But also just that clinical edge, just looking at his stats there from yesterday. One shot in the game, one goal. Just, that's it. That's what you want from your centre forward. When you have chances in the Championship, especially away from home, where usually they're quite hard to come by, you need someone to be able to put it away. And in Josh Coburn there, you have a clinical centre forward. And look, he's still a young player. He's still going to be frustrating in some games that we'll watch this season. But you have a player there that possibly wasn't in Michael Carrick's plans, really. Well, as close as last month wasn't in Michael Carrick's plans, but he's been thrown into the team and he's taken his chance, really. Last week, sublime against Southampton in terms of, as you mentioned, his build-up play, getting him behind and making Championship centre-halves, especially last week against Howard Bellis, who's sort of thrown up in conversations for top-level Championship centre-halves that are currently playing in the league, made him look silly last week in terms of just pinning him. He's gave away the penalty because of Coburn's movement. And then yesterday, playing up front by himself up against a back three. Porteous playing up against Harry Kane 2 weeks ago for Scotland, playing up against Coburn today and couldn't get to grips with him. So yeah, really pleasing to see Josh Coburn come into the side and really pleasing to see him take his chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, historically, Middlesbrough haven't been so fortunate with strikers from their production line, but Josh Coburn, he really does excite me. And I think there's almost like, from what I've judged off social media, even Middlesbrough fans, there's almost a reluctance to get excited about him because he's sort of a target man and it's, maybe not seen as sort of fashionable in football now to have a vocal point. But, you look at his loan spell last season, you look at even the moment against Tottenham, there's something in Josh Coburn that I've seen, and I know a lot of us do, that I just think, but look, I don't know, I wouldn't want to, give a sort of tier as to where Josh Coburn can go in his career, but certainly in terms of the trajectory of the way he's playing at the moment, he's going to be a very, very good Championship striker at the very minimum. So yeah, one to be excited about for me, and obviously hopefully he can continue that and his form and his goal scoring form going into the next couple of weeks, which of course we'll move on to now, Nathan. there's quite a large talking point that I'm sure is already at the forefront of your mind, Nathan, with a trip to Sunderland at the back end of the week. But before that, we do have Cardiff at home on Tuesday night. And although, in fairness to Cardiff, they have, in terms of previous seasons, I know it's still early doors, but they've had quite a turnaround, and they've had quite a turnaround of players. But I look at that Cardiff team, and I certainly think it's another opportunity for Middlesbrough to continue their good form. But also, I look at that Cardiff team and think, well, if we aren't at a certain level that we have been, perhaps even in the last two games, then they could really punish us, because they've got some top level players.
Yeah, there is, and they've got off to a really good start this season. It's sort of taken me by surprise. Obviously, at the start of the year, everyone does like a mini prediction for who they think's going to finish where, and I was looking at Cardiff and I thought they're going to struggle, but they brought in a manager from Turkey in Erol Bulut that you looked at that name and you thought, well, I haven't got a clue who you are, so you're probably going to fail. And yeah, they've started really well in that first game of the season. They went to Ellen Road, drew 2-2 there. But in the last few games, I'll just read you some figures out for you. 4 championship home wins in a row, 4 championship victories on the bounce, 3 clean sheets in their last 4 league games, and in every championship fixture so far this season, they've scored. So it's going to be a very difficult test. I know I'm the same as you, looking at some of the personnel, I'm thinking, well, we've got to be able to get at them. But I fell into the same trap last year with Cardiff at home, and we're 3-0 down after half an hour. So I'm not going to be too confident with predicting this one. I think it'll be a really good game. 2 sides that have got a little bit of form behind them. They're going to be wanting to come up here and sort of continue their run of good form heading into that final game before the international break at the weekend. And of course, we're going to come into this game at home as well, looking to continue our little run prior to, that lot on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I could tell even from when we sort of finished talking about Watford that your mind was already elsewhere, and I'd be willing to place a considerable amount of money that you were already thinking of being at the Stadium of Light on Saturday. Look, Cardiff is going to be an extremely difficult test, but in regards to the test that we're going to come up against in the week ahead of us, Sunderland are certainly the biggest, and the nerves are already there from the pair of us. But I mean, if you're watching this on YouTube, and for audio listeners, obviously you can't see Nathan right now, but the fear is obvious on his face. This is a man that is quite terrified ahead of travelling to Sunderland. You'll obviously be in attendance. The game is on Sky. But yeah, given their form at the moment, it is. I'm starting to be a little bit shaky.
Yeah, they're a really good side at the minute. Watching them play on Friday night, and albeit it's against Sheffield Wednesday, we're in turmoil. I mean, how we didn't beat them, I'll never know. But just went there, just battered them from pillar to post. 2-0 up within 8 minutes. Game's done. Sheffield Wednesday fans leaving after 20 minutes. Yeah, they're a really good side. They've got a lot of young, hungry players that have got a point to prove. And one that really stands out is currently the top goal scorer in the division, and that's Jack Clarke, who is certainly a player that did have a point to prove when he went to Sunderland. Of course, got that big move after having a good 6 months to a year at Leeds in the Championship, got that move to Tottenham, had numerous loan spells out in the Championship at sides like QPR and Stoke, and failed to pull up any trees at all out on loan. Got his move to Sunderland in League One, and in the last year has really stepped up. Premier League interest in him in the summer, and that can either make or break a player in the Championship. If you have Premier League interest in you, you can either down tools and say, look, you're not going to sell me. Well, I'm going to throw my toys out the pram. Or you can do exactly what he's doing, which is stepping up and making sure he's going to get that Premier League move in either January or next summer. And yeah, he's a very, very dangerous player. It'll be interesting to see what the week brings in terms of news regarding injuries. And of course, the Cardiff game. We don't know what's going to happen in that game as well. To see who's going to be at right back marking Clarke. Of course, it's not just him. They have other really good players in that midfield and forward line. But he's certainly the standout. And going there on Saturday, as a fan, I look forward to setting off 3 hours before kickoff for a 45-minute journey up the A19. I look forward to being treated like a prisoner when I'm there. And I look forward to seeing a few prehistoric faces down below me from the top tier of the Stadium of Light.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, Nathan, where, you know, there's that age-old debate amongst Middlesbrough and Sunderland fans that it's not a derby, and yet, you know, during that impressive win for them on Sky on Friday night, you could quite clearly hear them chanting about Sheffield Wednesday going down with the Borough. So obviously they must care to a certain extent, because otherwise they just wouldn't bother chanting. But yeah, we'll let them have that. If they need it, they haven't had an awful lot to cheer about over the last few years. So if that sort of gives them any positivity, then they can have that. But yeah, Nathan, it's a really big week for Middlesbrough, and look, every week's a big week after the start that we've had. But it's an interesting one, because up until now, really, we haven't had any sort of what you'd call huge tests in regards to a team's league position or the momentum that they've had going into the game. I think, you know, we all thought that Coventry, after beating us, would sort of continue that positive run of form. And even, yes, okay, they won yesterday, but they haven't really, after Middlesbrough win, managed to sort of put a string of results together. Whereas Cardiff and Sunderland, both obviously their league positions show how well they're doing at the moment. But in terms of, you know, the form going into the game, both teams will be full of confidence, and both teams will be thinking that, well, although Middlesbrough put some wins together, that they're there to be got at, and there's a reason why they find themselves 21st in the Championship. So a real test of Middlesbrough's resolve, a real test of, you know, if this mini turnaround is just a mini turnaround or if it's the start of something bigger. And there's reason to be scared because of that, but there's also reason to be very interested and, dare I say, optimistic.
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. My record at Sunderland is less than impressive. 2 visits, 1 3-3 draw that was probably one of the maddest games I've ever seen, really. Conceding in the 96th minute to a side that finished 24th in the Championship is really poor. And of course, last season, where I was sort of under the impression that when they'd been beat in the playoffs by Luton, that that'd be the end of them. We won't see them for a few years in terms of up the top end of the table. But I'd argue that they've got stronger, despite losing Stewart and Diallo. I'd argue that they are a side that have improved in terms of possibly not necessarily the personnel in terms of the names, but in terms of players that are already at a good level and I can only see improving. They've certainly got their recruitment in order. But yeah, less of that lot for now. We need to focus on Cardiff on Tuesday. Hopefully, another 3 points in the back pocket, which will then set us nicely up for the final game before the international break. Up the road against Tony Mowbray's boys. But yeah, I was saying yesterday, or thinking anyway, do you not look at Tony Mowbray being there, and does it not make you a little bit upset that one of our own is up there doing really well at Sunderland? And of course, he was manager of Middlesbrough and it didn't necessarily go right to plan. It sort of saddens me a little bit.
Oh yeah, massively. It's every week when you see the sort of clip from his press conference where he's, nailing Revels or a Twix or a Bounty or whatever chocolate that he's got in that given press conference. I can't help but laugh and smile. It does sadden me because you look back at his time at Middlesbrough, and although we had those sort of dramatic slumps after Christmas, you kind of think that he had been given some of the money that previous managers and managers post Tony Mowbray had been given, what he might have achieved. And yeah, I mean, that's a whole different discussion in itself, but I can completely see what you mean. But yeah, we won't go too much into that.
I was going to just throw in there, I know you said we won't go too much into it, but I'll just throw in there, after Wilder had been sacked last year, and Michael Carrick's name hadn't been mentioned, Tony Mowbray was out of a job, would you have taken him?
I'm going to be truthfully honest, probably not. But, he's gone and proved quite a lot of people wrong. And look, I guess it's all credit to Tony Mowbray for the job that he's done at Sunderland. There's been turmoil and all sorts going on. I mean, he done incredibly well to get them into the playoffs last year, and then by all accounts, they were plotting on sacking him at the end of the season. So, I mean, regardless of Sunderland being still, doing well in the Championship this season, I guess we can take some, happiness in the fact that there is sort of that still, lurking feeling of a bit of a circus at the back of the club. So, hopefully that sort of unfolds throughout the season, and the sort of form and positivity around that place at the moment quickly dies down. But yes, we don't want to sort of go too Sunderland heavy, because ultimately they could really just make us look quite silly next Saturday. So, Nathan, I mean, I'm struggling to get words out now because you've managed to build up my nerves, probably even more so than how your nerves were before we'd started talking about this. So thanks for that. And also, before we do go, we must say again that obviously the Football Content Awards voting is still open. We mentioned it in the last podcast, but votes can still be submitted, whether that be through Twitter or the links, which again I'll include in the YouTube description and the podcast description for this episode. Obviously, you may have seen this week on our X account. I'm still so used to calling it Twitter, that just feels wrong. That you can, obviously, as was the case in terms of nominations for the finalists, you can tweet your vote for Boropolis to win Best Club Content Creator in the Football League section of the awards. And also, for those that might be interested, we have two giveaways actually running on both Instagram and X for prints from a very good little business that if you know him, you probably know of him as Vizzy, the Burnley YouTuber that he set up. So yeah, if you haven't, then definitely go and check that out because it's a chance to win something quite good for the price of absolutely nothing apart from a couple of retweets and a couple of follows. So yes, a little bit of housekeeping there, but unless there's anything else that you want to add, Nathan, I think that wraps up this week's episode.
No, yeah, I think that wraps everything up nicely. It's certainly a nicer podcast when you are winning, and hopefully that'll continue into next week. I'm not holding out too much hope. But yeah, of course, next week's going to be the final podcast before another international break, in which Riley McGree will be playing at Wembley, which won't be for the first time this season. It'll probably be his first of three, I think, with a League Cup visit and a Wembley visit in May. So, yeah, the Borough are back on the march once again. Hopefully, this is us climbing the table now.
Yeah, well, maybe that can be the title of the podcast. You gave me last week, so I think with a few seconds remaining of this one, you might have given me this week. So thank you very much for that, Nathan, and thank you, as always, for having a bit of a natter about Borough like we do most weeks. So yes, a thank you to listeners and viewers as always, and that has been another episode of the Boropolis podcast.